He stood on a brightly lit stage, bathed in applause, holding a crystal trophy that declared him a visionary. To an audience of the city's elite, Gregory Finch painted a poignant picture of his rise from the ashes of a toxic marriage. He shamed the woman he'd left behind, his ex-wife Audrey, portraying her as a simple, unambitious anchor who had held him back. The crowd sighed with sympathy. But as the applause faded, a hush fell over the grand ballroom. The doors opened, revealing not one, but two figures whose presence sucked the very air from the room and from Gregory's lungs. This is the story of how a man's public lie collided with a woman's silent, staggering success. The chandeliers of the Grand Astoria ballroom dripped crystal light onto a sea of tuxedos and designer gowns. It was the annual Metropolitan Business Innovators Gala, New York City's premier event for the self-congratulatory and genuinely successful alike. Gregory Finch tonight felt he was firmly in the latter category. He navigated the crush with a practiced ease, a flute of champagne in one hand, his other hand ready to shake, patter back, or gesture expansively. "Walter, my friend," he boomed, clapping a portly man in a slightly too tight suit on the shoulder. "Remarkable quarter for sterling price, just remarkable. You're a magician with those logistics chains." Walter beamed. "Greg, good to see you. Heard you're the man of the hour tonight. Innovator of the year. Has a nice ring to it, eh?" "Oh, you know," Greg said with a carefully crafted shrug of humility. "Just trying to disrupt the digital marketing space. Finch Enterprises is a lean machine, but we're agile. We pivot." Pivot was Greg's favorite word. It sounded dynamic, intelligent. It was also what he'd told his investors last month when their flagship analytics software had lost two major clients. He didn't mention that part. Tonight was not about messy realities. It was about the curated narrative of success. His narrative. He moved on, his eyes scanning the room. He was a shark in this shimmering tank, constantly assessing networking, performing. He saw Harrison Cole, a tech mogul from the West Coast, holding court near the Raw Bar. He saw Catherine DeWitt, the formidable editor of Forbes, engaged in a hushed conversation with a senator. These were the people whose orbits he desperately wanted to enter permanently. Winning tonight's award was his golden ticket. His company, Finch Enterprises, was in truth a house of cards built on a foundation of debt and overpromised results. He'd sunk every last penny from his divorce settlement into it, and then some. He needed a massive influx of capital, a Series B funding round that was proving frustratingly elusive. The Innovator of the Year award, sponsored by the prestigious Beaumont Capital, was more than just a piece of glass. It was validation. It was a signal to the market and to skeptical investors that he was the real deal. He caught his reflection in a mirrored pillar. At 42, he was still handsome in a collegiate sort of way. His hair was perfectly coiffed, his jawline sharp, his suit tailored to perfection. He looked the part. He'd always believed that if you looked the part and talked the part, eventually you became the part. His ex-wife Audrey had never understood that. He took a sip of champagne, the bubbles fizzing with a bitterness only he could taste. Audrey. Even thinking her name felt like an anchor, dragging him back to a life of beige mediocrity. Their small suburban house, her modest job as a community librarian, her quiet contentment with a life that felt to him like a slow death. She read books. He wanted to write them, biographies of his own success. She wanted a garden. He wanted a global empire. He'd called her his ball and chain to his friends after a few drinks. Unambitious, lacking vision. When he'd finally left her, it felt like a rocket shedding its booster stage. He was free to soar. He told everyone the divorce was amicable, a simple matter of growing apart. But privately, he harbored a deep-seated resentment. He felt she had wasted a decade of his prime, forcing him to live a small life when he was destined for a grand one. Ladies and gentlemen, if you could please take your seats, our awards presentation is about to begin, a smooth voice announced over the sound system. Greg felt a jolt of adrenaline. This was it. He found his assigned table near the front, sharing it with a few mid-level executives and their spouses. He made small talk, his focus entirely on the stage. He saw his best friend and lawyer Paul give him a thumbs up from a nearby table. Paul knew how much was riding on this. He knew the numbers Greg had submitted to the awards committee were creatively embellished. The host, a local news anchor with a blindingly white smile, ran through the lesser awards. Excellence in logistics, community impact, sustainable growth. Greg barely listened, his heart thudding against his ribs. Finally, the moment arrived. And now for our final and most prestigious award of the evening, the anchor announced, his voice resonating with manufactured drama. The 2020 Innovator of the Year Award. This award recognizes a leader whose vision has not only propelled their own company forward, but has fundamentally changed the conversation in their industry. The committee, in partnership with our lead sponsor, Beaumont Capital, reviewed dozens of remarkable candidates. Greg held his breath. But one name consistently rose to the top. For his groundbreaking work in predictive consumer analytics and for building a dynamic new force in digital marketing, the Innovator of the Year is Mr. Gregory Finch of Finch Enterprises. The ballroom erupted in applause. A spotlight found Greg, and he rose, a slow, brilliant smile spreading across his face. He'd practiced this moment in the mirror 100 times. He buttoned his jacket, nodded graciously to his table mates, and strode toward the stage with the confidence of a man who believed he deserved every clap, every cheer. He shook the anchor's hand and accepted the heavy star-shaped crystal trophy. It felt real. It felt solid. It felt like victory. He stepped up to the podium, the warmth of the lights on his face. He looked out at the powerful, influential faces looking up at him, his audience. He cleared his throat, the microphone amplifying the small sound across the vast, silent room. He was ready to give the performance of his life. "Thank you, Greg," began, his voice thick with practiced emotion. "Thank you so much. To the gala committee, to the esteemed panel at Beaumont Capital, to all of you here tonight, I am truly deeply humbled." He paused, letting the weight of the word humbled hang in the air, a perfect counterpoint to the triumphant gleam in his eyes. When you start a company from scratch, from nothing more than an idea sketched on a napkin, you dream of moments like this. But the journey is never a straight line. It's filled with sacrifice, with doubt, with sleepless nights fueled by coffee and sheer, terrifying belief. The audience nodded. This was the language they understood, the heroic struggle of the entrepreneur. People see the success today, he continued, gesturing with the trophy. They see Finch Enterprises, a name synonymous with innovation. But they don't see the beginning. They don't see the risks I had to take. Not just financial risks, but personal ones. He was veering off the pre-approved script, now entering territory that was far more potent, far more personal. This was the part he had rehearsed in his head for weeks. This was his chance to cement his narrative, not just as a businessman, but as a man who had overcome adversity. Many of you know I went through a divorce a few years ago. A soft murmur rippled through the crowd. It was a daring move, bringing personal laundry into such a public forum. But Greg knew it would work. It made him relatable, vulnerable. "It's not something I talk about often." He lied, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, almost wounded tone. "But I feel it's important to be honest tonight because my personal journey is inextricably linked to my professional one. You cannot separate the man from the mission." He looked down at the podium as if gathering his strength. "I was with my ex-wife Audrey for 12 years, and for a long time I tried to fit into the life she wanted. A quiet life, a small life, predictable, safe." He infused the word safe with a palpable disdain. In this room, safe was an insult. But I had this fire in me. This hunger to build something, to create, to make a mark on the world. And I found myself in a partnership where that fire was seen not as a source of warmth, but as a threat. My ambition was a problem. My dreams were an inconvenience. He let that sink in. He could see the sympathetic tilts of heads, the soft, knowing glances between spouses. He was painting a masterpiece of manipulation. I remember one night I was working late on the business plan for what would become Finch Enterprises. I was so excited. I tried to explain the vision to her, the potential, how we could change the marketing world. And she looked at me with this blank expression and said, "Why can't you just be happy with what we have, Greg? This all seems so stressful." He shook his head sadly, a flicker of a pained smile on his lips. Stressful. She called my dream stressful. In that moment, I knew. I knew I had a choice. I could either extinguish my own flame to keep the peace in a small, comfortable home, or I could break free and bet on myself, even if it meant being completely alone. He looked up, his eyes sweeping across the audience, making eye contact with Catherine DeWitt, with Harrison Cole. I chose the fire. I chose the dream. I chose to walk away from everything that was familiar and safe with nothing but my belief in myself. It was the hardest decision of my life. But standing here tonight, holding this award, I know it was the right one. Tears welled in his eyes. They were real tears, but not of sorrow for a lost love. They were tears of pure, unadulterated self-admiration. "This trophy," he said, his voice cracking perfectly, "is not just for me. It's for anyone out there who has ever felt held back, anyone who has been told their dreams are too big, anyone who has had to make an impossible choice to pursue their destiny. Your passion is not a problem. It is your power." He raised the award high. "Thank you." The applause was thunderous, far louder than for any other recipient. It was a standing ovation. People were not just clapping for a successful company. They were clapping for a man's heroic, emotional journey. They were clapping for the story he had so masterfully sold them. Greg stood there, soaking it all in. He had done it. He hadn't just won an award. He had won the room. He had publicly recast his selfish abandonment of his wife into a noble act of self-realization. He had shamed Audrey, in absentia, painting her as a small-minded, unambitious woman who couldn't comprehend his greatness. He felt a surge of vindictive satisfaction. Let her read about this in the society pages from her quiet little library. This was his world now, a world she could never and would never be a part of. As the applause began to subside and he made his way back to his table, a new wave of well-wishers swarming him, he felt invincible, unassailable. He was Gregory Finch, Innovator of the Year, and nothing could possibly go wrong. Just as the buzz from Greg's speech began to settle into a comfortable thrum of dinner conversation, a subtle shift occurred at the far end of the ballroom. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was a change in atmospheric pressure, a quiet parting of the crowd near the grand entrance like iron filings aligning to a powerful, unseen magnet. The two towering oak doors, which had been closed since the dinner began, were pulled open by the hotel staff. Standing in the doorway were two men. They were not guests. They were dressed in impeccably tailored dark suits with communications earpieces nestled discreetly in their ears. They had the calm, watchful stillness of men for whom crowded rooms were not places of leisure, but tactical environments. Their eyes scanned the ballroom with a professional, dispassionate gaze. This was a security detail. A few heads turned intrigued. A politician's late arrival, perhaps, a reclusive celebrity. Then a third man stepped between them into the light of the ballroom. He was not tall or overtly muscular, but his presence was immense. He was in his late 50s, with a mane of silver hair swept back from a high forehead, and eyes the color of a winter sky. And he wore a simple, dark, exquisitely cut suit with no ostentation, no flashy watch, no diamond cufflinks. He didn't need them. His very posture radiated a quiet, unshakable authority that accessories couldn't buy and money could only imitate. A wave of recognition swept through the most powerful people in the room. Whispers spread like fire through dry grass. Is that? My God, it's him. Alistair Beaumont. The name itself seemed to carry weight. Alistair Beaumont. The reclusive, almost mythical head of Beaumont Capital, the gala's main sponsor. He rarely made public appearances, preferring to operate from the stratospheric heights of his global investment firm. For him to appear here in person was the equivalent of a royal visit. Gala organizers scrambled from their tables, their faces a mixture of panic and elation. Greg, still basking in the glow of his win, felt a prickle of something he couldn't identify. He had name-dropped Beaumont Capital in his speech, of course. To have the man himself appear now felt like a divine endorsement. Perhaps Beaumont had heard of his win and come to congratulate him personally. The thought sent a jolt of ego through him. He stood up a little straighter. But then Alistair Beaumont stepped to the side and extended a hand back into the hallway, and a woman stepped into the light. The air in Gregory Finch's lungs turned to ice. It was Audrey, but it wasn't. It couldn't be. The Audrey he had just so cruelly caricatured, was a creature of cardigans and sensible shoes. A woman whose idea of dressing up was putting on a clean blouse for a parent-teacher conference. A woman who seemed to shrink in crowds, her shoulders perpetually rounded, her gaze averted. This woman did not shrink. She commanded. She wore a gown of deep emerald silk that flowed around her like liquid night. It was elegant, severe, and breathtaking. Her honey-blonde hair, which she used to wear in a simple, practical ponytail, was styled in a chic, sophisticated chignon at the nape of her neck. A single, magnificent diamond necklace rested against her collarbone, catching the light from the chandeliers and fracturing it into 1,000 tiny rainbows. But it wasn't the clothes or the jewel. It was her face, her expression. The quiet librarian's face was gone, replaced by the sculpted, confident features of a woman comfortable with power. Her blue eyes, once soft and accommodating, were now clear-focused and discerning. She scanned the room with a calm poise that made it clear she was not here to be seen, but to observe. She took Alistair Beaumont's arm, and they began to move into the room. The security detail moved with them, a discreet but impenetrable perimeter. Greg felt a wave of vertigo. His mind stuttered, trying to reconcile the image of the woman on Beaumont's arm with the woman from his past. It was like seeing a black and white photograph suddenly impossibly bloom into vivid, high-definition color. Audrey, with Alistair Beaumont, the billionaire. The whispers in the room changed their tune. The focus was no longer on Greg. He was old news. All eyes were on the power couple that had just eclipsed everyone and everything else in the ballroom. Who is she? Someone at a nearby table murmured. I've never seen her before. She's stunning. Must be his new wife, another replied. He's been divorced for years. Greg's heart hammered against his ribs. Wife, Audrey, married to Alistair Beaumont. The thought was so preposterous, so utterly outside the realm of possibility, that he felt a hysterical laugh bubble in his chest. It was impossible. The woman he'd left because she had no ambition was now with one of the most ambitious, powerful men on the planet. He watched frozen as the chairman of the gala, a man who had given Greg a perfunctory handshake earlier, practically bowed as he greeted the couple. He saw Harrison Cole, the tech mogul, Greg had been trying to get a meeting with for 6 months. Approach Beaumont with a deferential smile. Beaumont nodded, then gestured toward Audrey, introducing her. Harrison Cole's eyes widened slightly, and he shook her hand with genuine respect. This wasn't a trophy wife. This wasn't a pretty escort. The way these titans of industry were reacting to her, it was something else entirely. Greg's trophy felt suddenly cold and heavy in his hands, a worthless piece of glass. The standing ovation, the sympathetic schuzz, the adulation, it all evaporated, turning into a sour mist of humiliation in his gut. He had just stood on a stage and in front of the most influential people in the city, publicly shamed a woman he painted as a simple provincial nobody. And that woman had just walked into the room on the arm of a king looking every inch the queen. His carefully constructed narrative, the one he had just so masterfully sold, had not just been challenged. It had been annihilated by her mere presence. Gregory Finch stood motionless amidst the swirl of the gala, his face pale, his mind reeling. He felt the blood drain from his face as a single, terrifying thought crystallized in his mind. What have I done? The world for Greg had shrunk to the space between his table and the slow, regal procession of Audrey and Alistair Beaumont across the ballroom. He watched as they were guided to the gala chairman's own table, the most prestigious seat in the house. A chair was instantly procured for Audrey, placed right between Beaumont and the senator. Catherine DeWitt had been talking to earlier. Greg felt an irrational, desperate urge to do something, to walk over there, to reclaim the narrative. What would he even say? Audrey, fancy seeing you here. You remember me, right, Greg? The guy who just told 300 people you were the human equivalent of a boat anchor. He sank back into his chair, the fabric feeling slick with his sudden sweat. His table mates were now chattering excitedly, their attention, like everyone else's, completely captured by the new arrivals. Can you believe it? Alistair Beaumont himself, one of the executives, said, craning his neck. I wonder what his connection is to the woman. She doesn't look like his usual type. Greg flinched. He knew Audrey's type. It was him, or so he had always believed. His friend Paul slid into the empty chair beside him. Paul's face, usually ruddy and cheerful, was ashen. Greg, he whispered, his voice tight. You need to leave. Now. What? Why? Greg hissed back, not taking his eyes off Audrey. She was laughing at something the senator said, a genuine, relaxed laugh. It was a sound he hadn't heard in years, and it lanced him with a pain he didn't understand. Because you are the stupidest man I have ever had the misfortune to know. Paul said, his voice a low, furious growl. You just stood up there and ran a eulogy for your marriage to a woman you painted as a simpleton. A simpleton who, it appears, is now romantically involved with the man whose company just gave you this award. The man you desperately need to impress for your Series B funding. Every word was a hammer blow. Greg's mind was still catching up. Funding, Beaumont Capital, the award sponsor. It all started to connect in a sickening, horrific tapestry. It's a fluke, Greg mumbled, more to himself than to Paul. She met him at some charity thing, a lucky break. She's nobody. Nobody. Paul scoffed, a harsh, humorless sound. Greg, look at her. Look at how people are looking at her. That is not nobody. That is somebody. And you just spent 10 minutes telling the entire New York business community that she was worthless. Suddenly, Samantha Sam Rossi was standing before their table. Sam had been Audrey's best friend since college, a sharp-tongued corporate lawyer whom Greg had always found abrasive. He hadn't seen her in the crowd earlier. Her dark eyes were narrowed, and they were fixed on him with an expression of pure, unadulterated contempt. Finch, she said, her voice dripping with ice. That was quite the speech. A real work of fiction. You always were a talented storyteller. Sam Gregg started trying to muster some of his earlier charm. I was just... Save it, she cut him off. She leaned down, placing her hands on the table, her face close to his. You have no idea, do you? You're sitting here with your little prize, so proud of the lies you spun. You have absolutely no idea who you just insulted. Greg's bravado finally cracked. What are you talking about? She's a librarian from Westchester, or she was. Sam let out a short, sharp laugh that made the people nearby glance over. Oh, sweetie, Audrey hasn't been a librarian for over 3 years. Not since her thesis on algorithmic bias in emerging market data got the attention of a few people in Silicon Valley. People who actually appreciate a brilliant mind, not try to snuff it out because it makes them feel insecure. Greg stared at her, his mouth agape. Thesis algorithmic bias. This was a woman whose biggest intellectual debate with him had been over whether to alphabetize their spice rack. She went back to school after you left. Greg, Sam continued, her voice a relentless staccato, got her master's in data science, then her PhD. All while you were busy playing visionary with her divorce settlement money. She was recruited by a dozen firms, but one made her an offer she couldn't refuse. A cold dread, absolute and profound, began to seep into Greg's bones. He slowly turned his gaze back to the head table. Audrey was no longer just talking to the senator. She was explaining something using her hands to sketch out a concept in the air. The senator and Alistair Beaumont were listening with rapt attention. She wasn't a guest. She wasn't a wife. She was at a business meeting. The gala chairman stood and tapped a glass for attention. Friends, colleagues, we have one more very special announcement. We are so honored to not only have the esteemed Alistair Beaumont with us tonight, but also a key mind from his organization. Mr. Beaumont's firm was our lead sponsor, but the final decision on the Innovator of the Year was spearheaded by the brilliant CEO of their most dynamic subsidiary, Beaumont Innovations. The chairman beamed, gesturing towards the head table. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce you all to the woman who is reshaping the future of tech investment, Dr. Audrey Lancaster. The name hit the room like a shockwave. Lancaster, her maiden name. Dr. Audrey Lancaster, CEO of Beaumont Innovations. The words didn't compute. Greg's brain simply refused to process them. He felt the blood rush from his head, leaving a roaring sound in his ears. The room tilted. CEO. The woman he had called unambitious. The woman he had accused of holding him back. The woman he had painted as a simple house cat was in fact a lioness. And she was the head of the very division that had just given him his award. She had signed off on it. She had read his creatively embellished application. She knew. He looked at her again. This time, across the crowded ballroom, her eyes met his. There was no anger in her gaze. There was no hatred, no triumph. There was something far worse. A calm, clinical, pitying assessment. It was the look a scientist gives a specimen under a microscope just before dissecting it. The full, horrifying scope of his miscalculation crashed down on him. He hadn't just made a social faux pas. He hadn't just embarrassed himself. He had, on a public stage in front of the entire industry, performed a character assassination of the powerful CEO from whom he was hoping to get funding, a woman who held his entire professional future in the palm of her hand. The unraveling was complete. He was no longer the hero of the story. He was the fool. The rest of the dinner was a blur of muffled sounds and indistinct shapes. Greg sat paralyzed, the crystal trophy on the table in front of him, feeling like a block of radioactive waste. People at his table shot him nervous, pitying glances before turning away as if his colossal failure was contagious. Paul just sat beside him, grimly nursing a glass of whiskey, the "I told you so," hanging unspoken, but deafeningly loud in the space between them. Greg's mind raced, desperately trying to find an escape route from the disaster he had engineered. Maybe it was a test. Maybe Audrey had approved the award to see what he would do to give him a chance to be gracious. But he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to his core, that he had failed that test in the most spectacular way imaginable. The gala began to wind down. Guests started to mingle again, casting curious, speculative looks toward Greg's table. He was no longer a success story. He was a scandal waiting to happen, a piece of gossip that would be eagerly dissected in boardrooms and over brunch for weeks to come. Then, the moment he had been dreading arrived. Alistair Beaumont and Audrey Lancaster rose from their table. They were leaving, but they weren't heading directly for the exit. They were cutting a path through the room, a path that led directly toward him. Greg's fight-or-flight instinct screamed at him to run, to hide under the table, to simply cease existing. But he was trapped, pinned by the weight of 100 pairs of eyes. Beaumont reached him first. He was even more imposing up close. His winter sky eyes were cold and analytical. He glanced at the trophy on the table, then at Greg. Mr. Finch Beaumont, said, his voice a low, smooth baritone that held no warmth whatsoever. Gregory Finch, I've read your file. Greg's mouth was dry. He struggled to his feet, knocking his chair slightly. Mr. Beaumont, sir, it's an honor. Beaumont ignored the pleasantry. My firm, as you know, is always looking for investment opportunities. We conduct thorough due diligence on potential acquisitions in promising sectors. Finch Enterprises was on that list. He used the past tense. Was. The single word was a guillotine. Greg's heart plummeted. Was, he stammered. It was then that Audrey stepped forward, moving to stand beside Beaumont. She looked at Greg, her expression unreadable. Up close, he could see the faint lines of concentration around her eyes, the sheer, focused intelligence that he had mistaken for passivity for so many years. Hello, Greg, she said. Her voice was calm even. It held none of the history of their 12 years together. It was the voice of a CEO addressing a failing subordinate. Audrey. He whispered the name, a ghost on his lips. I didn't know. That's abundantly clear, she replied, her gaze unwavering. You never did. She let the simple statement hang in the air, a final verdict on their entire shared history. She glanced at the trophy, a flicker of something not quite amusement, but a kind of academic interest in her eyes. Your application was compelling. The narrative you constructed was very persuasive. Your Q3 revenue projections, in particular, were quite ambitious. Greg felt a fresh wave of nausea. She knew. Of course she knew. A woman with a PhD in data science would have seen through his inflated numbers in a nanosecond. She had likely seen the real data, the mounting debt, the client attrition. Beaumont Capital's forensic accounting team is one of the best in the world. Audrey continued, her voice, still level, still devastatingly calm. They have a tendency to find discrepancies others might miss. They find it stressful when the story doesn't match the data. She used his own word against him. Stressful. The word he had used to mock her caution, to frame her as an obstacle. She had turned it into a scalpel and was now surgically dismantling his entire world with it. The implication was brutally clear. They hadn't just rejected him for funding. They had investigated him. They had found his fraud. He wasn't just going to fail, he was going to be exposed. The award wasn't a prize, it was bait, and he had swallowed it whole. Alistair Beaumont delivered the final, quiet blow. We value integrity above all else, Mr. Finch. In business and in life, it seems you have a deficit in both. He looked at Audrey. Shall we go, my dear? Yes, Audrey said, turning away from Greg without a backward glance. She placed her hand on Alistair's arm, and together they walked away. They didn't look back. To them, he was already gone. Greg stood there, his suit feeling like a lead shroud. The senator, Catherine DeWitt Harrison, Cole, everyone who mattered had witnessed the exchange. They had seen him lauded, and then in the space of 30 minutes, utterly and completely demolished by the very woman he had tried to humiliate. The whispers started again, louder this time, sharper. He could feel the judgment, the scorn, the delicious thrill of seeing a high flyer crash and burn. He looked at the crystal star in his hand. Innovator of the year. It was a monument to his own stupidity, a permanent reminder of the moment his lies had finally caught up to him. He felt a trembling start in his hands, a deep, shuddering tremor that spread through his entire body. He couldn't breathe. The opulent ballroom, the glittering lights, the sea of faces, it all blurred into an accusatory smear of color and sound. He froze, utterly and completely. He was a statue of a ruined man, left alone on the stage of his own spectacular self-destruction. Audrey and Alistair didn't speak as their driver navigated the gleaming, rain-slicked streets of Manhattan. The security detail sat in a separate car behind them, a silent, watchful presence. Inside the hushed interior of the Rolls-Royce, the frantic energy of the gala felt a world away. Finally, Alistair reached over and took her hand. His touch was warm and steady. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice gentle. Audrey looked out the window at the city lights blurring past. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel the echo of the past, the sting of Greg's public betrayal, the phantom pain of a life she had once thought was hers. But it was faint, like a signal from a distant star. "I'm fine," she said, and was surprised to find it was the complete truth. She turned to look at him, a small, genuine smile touching her lips. "More than fine. It was clarifying." "He's a fool," Alistair stated, not with anger, but with the dispassionate finality of a diagnosis. "He mistook kindness for weakness, a common and fatal error. He built his identity on a story." Audrey mused, her analytical mind taking over. "A story where he was the hero, and I was the obstacle. Tonight the story just fell apart. I almost feel sorry for him." "Almost," Alistair agreed, a slight twinkle in his eye. "Our legal team will be in touch with the SEC regarding Finch Enterprises' fraudulent reporting tomorrow morning. Pity is a luxury he can no longer afford." They rode the rest of the way in comfortable silence. Their relationship hadn't been a whirlwind romance born from a chance meeting. Alistair had sought her out after reading her doctoral thesis, impressed by her mind long before he was captivated by her grace and strength. He had offered her a job, a challenge, a platform to use the brilliance Greg had tried so hard to ignore. He had seen her not as someone to complete him, but as a formidable equal. Love had grown from that deep well of mutual respect. What happened tonight wasn't about revenge for Audrey. It was simply a consequence, a final closing of a ledger she had moved on from years ago. The next morning, the financial news headlines were brutal. "Innovator of the Year Finch Enterprises under investigation for securities fraud." "Gregory Finch resigns as CEO amid allegations of systemic deception." "Sources report CEO's public comments at Gala May have triggered scrutiny." Greg Finch disappeared. His company imploded, taken apart by receivers and investigators. The crystal trophy was likely packed away in a cardboard box in a storage unit, a forgotten relic of a life that had been a lie. Miles away in her corner office overlooking Central Park, Audrey stood with a mug of coffee, watching the sunrise over the city. Her desk was covered not with gossip columns, but with schematics for a new satellite data project. Her mind was on orbital mechanics and market projections, not on the man who had faded into a pathetic footnote in her past. She was not the woman he had left. In truth, she had never been the woman he thought he knew. He had only ever seen his own reflection in her, a mirror for his own insecurities and grandiose delusions. Now that the mirror was gone, he had been forced to see himself for the first time, and the image had shattered him. Audrey took a sip of her coffee. The sun was climbing higher, bathing the city in a clean golden light. It was a new day, her day, and she had built it herself. 6 months had passed since the night of the gala. The seasons had turned, stripping the trees bare in Central Park and dusting the city with the first flurries of an early winter. For Audrey Lancaster, the time had been a whirlwind of progress and creation. For Gregory Finch, it had been an eternity spent in a freefall. His world now was a fourth-floor walk-up in Queens, with peeling paint and a view of a brick wall. The expansive, sun-drenched loft he had once called home had been liquidated along with his art, his designer furniture, and his tailored suits. His days, once packed with power lunches and investor calls, were now a monotonous stretch of silence, broken only by the hum of a dying refrigerator and the rustle of letters from law firms. He sat at a wobbly card table, staring at a document from the bankruptcy trustee. It was dense with legal jargon he couldn't penetrate: asset liquidation, creditor claims, non-dischargeable debt. The words swam before his eyes. He had lost everything. The company was a crater. His reputation was toxic waste. Friends, even Paul, had distanced themselves, their calls becoming shorter and less frequent until they stopped altogether. He was an outcast from the world he had fought so hard to conquer, a ghost haunting the edges of a city that had already forgotten him. In the early days of his ruin, he had been consumed by a burning, self-righteous anger. He blamed Audrey. He blamed Alastair Beaumont. He saw himself as the victim of a vindictive, coordinated attack. In his mind, Audrey had schemed using her newfound power to orchestrate his downfall as petty revenge. This narrative sustained him for a while, a flickering candle of indignation against the encroaching darkness of his reality. Tonight, that candle was about to be extinguished for good. He picked up his tablet, the screen cracked from a moment of frustration a week ago. He scrolled aimlessly through news sites, a masochistic ritual of seeing the names and faces of people who wouldn't take his calls anymore. Then he saw it, a feature article in Vanity Fair promoted on the front page. The headline was simple, elegant, and to Greg, utterly devastating. The Beaumont Paradigm. Inside the Quiet Partnership, Redefining an Empire. The feature image was a photograph of Audrey and Alastair. They weren't at a gala or a press event. They were in what looked like a library or a study firelight warming the rich wood of the bookshelves behind them. Alastair was listening, his head slightly inclined, while Audrey spoke, her hands shaping an idea in the air between them. They looked less like a power couple and more like two brilliant minds engaged in a conversation that had been going on for years. The intimacy of it, the shared intellectual space, was more potent than any public display of affection. With a trembling finger, Greg tapped the link. He told himself he was looking for proof of her vindictiveness, for a quote he could twist into evidence for his persecution complex. But as he read, a different, more terrifying feeling began to take hold. The article wasn't about the gala. It mentioned the incident at the Innovators Awards only once in passing, as an example of the anachronistic corporate world colliding with the quiet competence of the Beaumont ethos. It was a footnote. His life's most humiliating moment was a footnote in their story. The profile delved deep into the workings of Beaumont Innovations, the subsidiary Audrey ran. It described her as less a traditional CEO and more a chief architect of the future. There were photos of her at headquarters, not behind a large mahogany desk, but standing in front of a floor-to-ceiling whiteboard covered in complex equations and data flowcharts. She was surrounded by a team of young, brilliant data scientists and engineers who, according to the journalist, regarded her with a reverence bordering on awe. One of her lead engineers, a prodigy from MIT, was quoted, "Dr. Lancaster sees things no one else does. She'll look at a chaotic data set and see a perfect, elegant pattern. She doesn't just manage us, she elevates the entire conversation. She's the smartest person in any room she enters, but she never makes you feel that way. She just makes you want to be smarter." Greg remembered the nights he had come home late, bragging about some minor victory at his fledgling company. Audrey would be at the kitchen table reading a book on quantum physics or chaos theory. He had dismissed it as a quaint hobby, a way for her to feel intellectual. "That's nice, honey," he would say, patting her on the head before launching into a monologue about his own supposed genius. The memory now made his skin crawl with shame. He hadn't been patronizing a hobbyist. He had been condescending to a master. The article pivoted to their life outside of work at their sprawling but understated estate in North Salem. The journalist described a home filled not with opulent status symbols, but with books, art, and scientific instruments. A state-of-the-art observatory was housed in a dome on a hill overlooking the property. "Astronomy is her passion," Alastair Beaumont was quoted as saying, his voice, even in print, radiating pride. "She finds it relaxing to map the movements of bodies billions of miles away. It gives one perspective." Then came the interview with Audrey herself. Greg's heart hammered as he read her words. "I've always been drawn to complex systems," she said. "Whether it's the financial markets, the migration patterns of birds, or the formation of galaxies. There are underlying principles, hidden structures in everything. The key is to look at the whole system, not just the loudest, most obvious parts. The journalist asked her about her transition from academia to the corporate world. Her answer was the final devastating blow to Greg's carefully constructed reality. It wasn't so much a transition as a change in application. Audrey explained, her voice described as calm and measured. For a long time, I think I misapplied my energy. I was trying to analyze and fix a system that was fundamentally, structurally unsound. I believed that if I was just patient enough, logical enough, I could stabilize it. But you can't reason with entropy. You can't build a future on a flawed foundation. I eventually learned that it's far more productive and infinitely more rewarding to build something new, something strong from the ground up. Greg dropped the tablet. It clattered to the floor, the screen going dark. He saw it. He finally truly saw it. You can't reason with entropy. A flawed foundation. A system that was structurally unsound. She wasn't talking about data sets or companies. She was talking about him. She was talking about their marriage. The anger drained out of him, replaced by a cold, hollow clarity that was far more painful. She hadn't orchestrated his downfall out of revenge. She hadn't given him a second thought. His ruin wasn't the result of her actions. It was the inevitable result of his own. He was the flawed foundation. He was the entropy. He had spent years believing he was the sun, and she was a small, dim planet caught in his orbit. The truth was, she had been a star all along, and he had been a man standing on the ground trying to convince her that the whole universe was the size of their backyard. He hadn't just failed to see her potential, he had actively tried to smother it, because her light threatened to expose the shabby, insecure man he was, behind the performative charisma. He didn't want an equal partner, he wanted an audience. And when she had quietly decided to stop clapping, he had mistaken it for failure on her part, not his. A sob escaped his throat, a raw animal sound of pure loss. It wasn't a loss of money or status. It was the loss of a past he had completely misunderstood and a future he had thrown away. The woman in that article, the brilliant, powerful, serene woman charting constellations, could have been his partner. He could have been standing beside her looking at the stars, but he had been too busy looking at his own reflection in a puddle. Miles away, under a vast, clear and star-dusted sky, Audrey Lancaster adjusted the focus on the primary mirror of her telescope. The crisp winter air was still, and the silence of the countryside was a welcome balm. Tonight, she was observing the Andromeda Galaxy, a sprawling city of stars 2.5 million light-years away. The door to the observatory opened softly, and Alistair walked in, carrying 2 steaming mugs. He handed one to her without a word, and stood beside her, looking up at the velvet blackness. "Anything interesting?" he asked, after a few moments of shared silence. "M31 is putting on a good show tonight," she murmured, her eye still pressed to the eyepiece. All that beautiful, chaotic, swirling order. Billions of stars, all held together by gravity. "Sounds familiar," he said, with a smile in his voice. She smiled back, turning away from the telescope to look at him. The man who saw her, who celebrated her, who challenged her to be nothing but herself. The Gala Gregory, the wreckage of that past life, it wasn't even a memory. It was just noise that had long since faded, a signal from a dead star that had taken years to finally vanish from her sky. Her universe was here now. It was in the quiet hum of the telescope's motor, in the warmth of the mug in her hands, in the steady presence of the man beside her. Her gaze went back to the heavens, to the faint, misty patch of light that was a neighboring galaxy. So much to discover, so much to build, so much to see. Her focus wasn't on the ashes of a world that had burned down. It was on the infinite, glittering constellations waiting to be explored. That right there is a story about the vast difference between perception and reality. It's a reminder that the loudest person in the room is often the most insecure, and that true strength doesn't need to announce itself. Gregory Finch built his world on a stage of lies needing an audience to validate him. Audrey Lancaster built her empire in the quiet halls of knowledge and innovation, needing only her own brilliance to succeed. When those two worlds collided, one was revealed to be a fragile facade, while the other stood as an unshakable testament to character and intellect. What did you think of Audrey's incredible transformation and Greg's ultimate downfall? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with someone who appreciates a tale of true vindication, and make sure you subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable real-life dramas. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an update.
What happens when a man's final cruel prophecy is shattered in the most spectacular way imaginable? For Emma Vance, the final words her celebrity ex-husband, Julian Thorne, ever spoke to her were a curse. "You're nothing without me. No one will ever want you. You will die alone." He said it with the smug certainty of a man who believed he had authored her entire existence. But what Julian didn't count on, what the world couldn't have predicted, was that the universe had a flair for irony. Less than 12 hours later, Emma Vance wouldn't just be fine. She'd be on the front page of every major news outlet, her name a global trending topic, all because of a single candid photograph, her hand held gently securely in the hand of the world's most enigmatic and untouchable billionaire. This isn't just a story about revenge, it's about what happens the morning after your world ends. The air in the penthouse was cold. It wasn't the fault of the climate control, a state-of-the-art system Julian Thorne had often boasted about in interviews for architectural magazines. It was a frigid, soul-deep cold that emanated from the man himself. Julian, with his perfectly coiffed silver hair and a smile engineered for talk show sofas, stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down at the sparkling expanse of New York City, as if he owned it. In many ways, he thought he did. "It's all signed Emma," he said, not turning to look at her. His voice, the same one that calmed millions of his followers with platitudes about unlocking your inner power, was now clipped and sharp, a shard of glass. Emma Vance clutched the pen in her hand, her knuckles white. The final divorce paper sat on the vast marble island in the kitchen, a kitchen she had designed from the veining in the stone to the specific shade of brushed brass on the handles. It was a space meant for warmth, for laughter, for the life she thought they were building. Now, it was just a stage for her public execution. "I know, Julian," she whispered. Her voice was hoarse. She hadn't slept in days. For 10 years, she had been Mrs. Thorne, the quiet, supportive wife of the self-help magnate Julian Thorne, author of the global bestseller The Architect of You. She had been the one who edited his manuscripts until 3 in the morning, who fact-checked his research, who coached him through his anxieties before every major speech. She had sacrificed her own burgeoning career as an academic, specializing in Renaissance art, to build his empire, believing his success was their success. The cracks had started as hairline fractures, his casual dismissal of her opinions, his gaslighting her memories of events, the way he'd subtly mock her in front of their influential friends. Then came the affairs which he'd explained away as the unfortunate but necessary burdens of a man of his stature. The final break came when she discovered he wasn't just having an affair. He had a long-term partner, a younger, more malleable version of herself, already installed in a condo he'd bought downtown. Good. He finally turned his eyes, sweeping over her with disdain. She wore a simple grey cashmere sweater and jeans, a stark contrast to his tailored Zegna suit. She felt like a ghost in her own home. "The movers will be here tomorrow for my remaining effects. Your things, Well, you don't have much, do you? I'll have them put in storage. You have 30 days to collect them. Every word was a calculated blow. He knew her things were mostly books, research papers, and sentimental items from her family, things that held no monetary value to him. Where am I supposed to go, Julian? She asked the question, tasting like ash. The penthouse was in his name. The bank accounts had been systematically drained into trusts she couldn't access. Her lawyer, a timid man overwhelmed by Julian's legal Rottweilers, had managed to secure her a settlement that was, in Julian's world, pocket change. It was enough to live on for a year, maybe two, if she was frugal. It was an insult disguised as a severance package. He smirked, a cruel twisting of the lips that never reached his televised eyes. I don't know, Emma. That's your problem now, isn't it? You wanted to be independent. So be independent. He walked over to the island, picking up his pristine leather briefcase. He didn't even glance at her. He was already moving on. Tears pricked at her eyes, hot and shameful. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction. She straightened her back, lifting her chin. I will. Her defiance seemed to amuse him. He paused at the door, turning back for one final devastating volley. His face was a mask of mock pity. You know, I almost feel sorry for you, he said, his voice dropping into the intimate conspiratorial tone he used on his podcasts. You poured everything into me. You have no career, no connections of your own. You're, 36? Past your prime, darling. The world is a brutal place for women like you. He stepped closer, his expensive cologne suffocating her. He leaned, in his voice a venomous whisper, in her ear. Let me give you one last piece of free advice, my dear ex-wife. No one will ever want you. You're nothing without me. You carry the stench of failure. Men of quality, men of substance, they want a winner. They don't want someone's discarded leftovers. You will die alone. He pulled back, a look of profound satisfaction on his face. He had delivered his curse. It was the final brick in the wall he had built around her heart. And then he was gone. The heavy door clicked shut, the sound echoing in the cavernous empty space. For a long moment, Emma didn't move. She just stood there, his words slithering into the cracks of her broken confidence. No one will ever want you. You will die alone. She finally let out a ragged sob, collapsing against the cold marble. The city lights outside blurred into a cruel, glittering mockery. Julian was right. She had given him her youth, her intellect, her loyalty. And in return, he had taken her name, her home, her future, and left her with nothing but a curse ringing in her ears. In that moment, sitting alone in the ruins of her life, she believed him. The next few weeks were a blur of beige. Beige boxes, beige walls of a tiny third-floor walk-up in Brooklyn, and a beige, flavorless existence. Emma had found the apartment in a daze. It was all she could afford. The grand views of Central Park were replaced by a view of a brick wall and a perpetually overflowing dumpster. The scent of fresh orchids Julian insisted on was replaced by the smell of damp old wood and her neighbor's cooking. She unpacked the few boxes Julian's men hadn't accidentally misplaced. Her books, her precious companions, filled makeshift shelves. Her research notes on the artist Artemisia Gentileschi, a female painter who had triumphed over immense personal violation and patriarchal oppression, felt like a cruel joke. Emma had once dreamed of writing the definitive book on her. Now she could barely summon the energy to read the titles. Julian's curse echoed in the cramped space. No one will ever want you. It became the soundtrack to her lonely nights. She'd scroll through social media, a masochistic ritual. Julian was thriving. He was photographed with A-list actors giving talks at prestigious conferences, and his new girlfriend, a model named Crystal, was splashed across his Instagram, always laughing, always perfect. He had already rewritten their history, painting himself as the patient husband who had finally freed himself from a negative and uninspiring partner. His followers lapped it up, flooding his comments with praise for his strength and authenticity. Emma's only lifeline was Chloe Davies. Chloe, a sharp-tongued, fiercely loyal art gallery owner, had been her friend since college. She'd never liked Julian, calling him a self-help vampire who drains the life out of everyone and sells it back to them in a paperback. Chloe showed up one Friday evening, armed with 2 bottles of expensive wine and a container of pad thai. She took one look at the apartment, and Emma's gaunt face and her expression hardened. "Okay, that's it," Chloe declared, setting the food on a wobbly IKEA table. "The moping is officially over. Operation Phoenix begins now." Emma gave a weak smile. "I don't feel much like a mythical bird, Chloe. More like a pigeon with a broken wing." "Nonsense," Chloe said, pouring a generous glass of Sancerre. "You are Emma Vance. You can spot a forged Botticelli from 20 paces, and you can recite Vasari's Lives of the Artists backwards. That sociopath didn't give you your brain. He just tried to convince you not to use it. We just need to remind you who you are." Chloe talked for hours, her voice filling the quiet apartment with life. She spoke of new artists, of gallery openings, of the vibrant world that Emma had been cut off from. Slowly, tentatively, Emma found herself engaging, correcting a point Chloe made about the use of lapis lazuli in the Scrovegni chapel, the old fire of her intellect flickering faintly. "See, she's still in there," Chloe said, pointing at her with a shrimp-laden fork. "Now for the main event." She reached into her designer tote bag and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. The cardstock was heavy, expensive. The calligraphy was elegant. "What's this?" Emma asked. "This," Chloe said with a flourish, "is your re-entry into the world. It's the St. Jude's Foundation Annual Benefit Gala, the biggest art world event of the fall. They're auctioning off a recently discovered Degas sketch. Everyone who is anyone will be there." Emma recoiled as if the envelope were on fire. "Chloe, no, I can't. What would I wear? Who would I talk to? Julian will be there. He's a patron." "First," Chloe said, ticking the points off on her fingers, "I have a friend at Marchesa who owes me a colossal favor. You will be dressed in a gown that will make angels weep. Second, you will talk to me. And third, screw Julian. Seeing you there looking magnificent and not giving a damn about him will be like a stake through his narcissistic heart. It's the perfect revenge." "I don't want revenge, Chloe. I just want to be invisible." "Too bad," Chloe countered. "Invisibility is cancelled. You've spent a decade in the shadows. It's time to stand in the light. Not for him, not for anyone else. For you. Remember the woman who wanted to write the Gentileschi book? The one who was passionate and brilliant? She wouldn't hide from a bully in a bespoke suit. She'd face him." Emma looked at the invitation. The St. Jude's Foundation. The very name felt like a sign. She thought of Julian's parting words, the poison of his curse. "You will die alone." Maybe he was right. Or maybe, just maybe, Chloe was. Maybe the only way to break a curse was to defy it. She took a deep breath, the first one that felt like it reached the bottom of her lungs in months. "Okay," she said, her voice stronger than it had been all evening. "Okay, I'll go." Chloe's smile was triumphant. "That's my girl. Now let's finish this wine. We have a phoenix to raise from the ashes." The ballroom of the Pierre Hotel was a galaxy of glittering chandeliers and even more glittering people. The air hummed with the low thrum of powerful conversations, scented with expensive perfume and ambition. Emma felt a wave of vertigo. For years, she had navigated these events at Julian's side, a silent accessory. Tonight, she was on her own, and it was terrifying. Chloe, true to her word, had worked magic. The Marchesa gown was a masterpiece of midnight blue silk that shimmered with every movement. It was elegant, understated, and fit her as if it were spun just for her. Her hair was swept up in a loose romantic chignon, and for the first time in a long time, the woman staring back at her from the reflection in a champagne flute looked not like a victim, but like herself. "Stop hiding behind the ficus," Chloe hissed, pulling her gently by the arm. "You look like a goddess. Own it." They circulated Chloe, greeting people with air kisses and sharp witticisms. Emma managed a few polite smiles, but her heart was hammering against her ribs. She kept scanning the crowd for Julian, a primal sense of dread coiling in her stomach. The auction began. The auctioneer, a man with a plummy British accent and a theatrical flair, charmed the room into parting with extraordinary sums of money for art vacations and experiences. Emma found herself genuinely captivated by the art, her professional eye assessing the works, her mind momentarily distracted from her anxiety. The main event was the Degas sketch, a delicate, intimate drawing of a ballerina tying her shoe. Bidding was fierce, paddles shooting up across the room. Emma watched mesmerized when she saw him. Julian. He was sitting at a prominent front table, his arm possessively around Crystal's chair, his paddle held high. He wanted the Degas. Of course he did. It was a trophy. Emma felt a chill and turned away, needing to escape. "I need some air," she murmured to Chloe, slipping away from their table towards a set of French doors that led to a small, secluded terrace. The cool night air was a balm. The terrace was blessedly empty, overlooking a quiet courtyard garden. She leaned against the balustrade, closing her eyes, trying to will away the image of Julian's smug face. This was a mistake. She wasn't ready. "It's a beautiful piece, isn't it, the Degas?" The voice was deep, calm, and startlingly close. Emma's eyes snapped open. A man was standing a few feet away, half hidden in the shadows, looking not at her, but out at the garden. He was tall, dressed in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, but he wore it with a kind of casual indifference, as if it were a second skin. "Yes," Emma found herself saying, her voice a little breathless. His use of line, "It's so economical, but it captures the entire weight and strain of the moment. It's not just a pretty picture." The man turned his head slightly, and she caught a glimpse of his profile in the dim light. Strong jaw, thoughtful eyes, an air of quiet intensity that was the polar opposite of Julian's performative charisma. There was something familiar about him, but she couldn't place it. "Most people just see the ballerina," he said, his gaze now on her. His eyes were a startling shade of grey, like a stormy sea. "You see the work." A blush rose on her cheeks. It was the first time in years anyone had seen her, and not the woman standing next to Julian Thorne. I studied art history. It was my field." Was he asked, a note of genuine curiosity in his voice? She corrected herself, a spark of her old self igniting. "It is my field." He smiled, a small, genuine smile that transformed his serious face. "Good." An awkward, yet not uncomfortable silence fell between them. From inside, they could hear the auctioneer's voice rising to a crescendo. "Sold to Mr. Julian Thorne." Emma flinched, the sound of his name a physical blow. She wrapped her arms around herself, the cold returning. The stranger's perceptive eyes missed nothing. "You know him," he stated. It wasn't a question. She gave a wry, bitter laugh. "He's my ex-husband. The divorce was finalized yesterday." The words tumbled out before she could stop them. She instantly regretted it. Why was she dumping her baggage on this handsome stranger? But he didn't recoil or offer empty platitudes. He just nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "I'm sorry," he said, and it sounded like he actually meant for the turmoil, not for the divorce itself. She shook her head, trying to dismiss it. "It's fine. I should go back inside." "Wait," he said, taking a step closer. The space between them seemed to crackle with an unexpected energy. "My name is Alistair." He extended his hand. She placed hers in it. His grip was warm, firm, and surprisingly gentle. A jolt, like a static shock, shot up her arm. "Emma," she replied. "Emma," he repeated as if testing the name on his tongue. "It was a pleasure to meet you, Emma, who sees the work." He held her hand for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. As she turned to walk back inside, her heart doing a strange, unfamiliar flutter, he spoke again, his voice soft. For what it's worth, he didn't deserve that sketch. He only sees the ballerina. Emma walked back into the ballroom, her mind reeling. She didn't see the rest of the auction. She didn't even notice when Chloe returned to the table. She was consumed by the brief, intense connection with the man on the terrace, Alistair. As the gala wound down, Chloe helped her navigate the exit. They were waiting for their car when a flurry of activity erupted near the main entrance. A swarm of paparazzi, who had been waiting for a politician to leave, suddenly turned their lenses towards the doors. Alistair emerged. And suddenly, Emma understood. The flashes were blinding. Shouts of his name echoed in the night. Alistair Sterling. The Alistair Sterling. The reclusive tech billionaire. The prodigy who had made his fortune in sustainable energy and now ran the Sterling Foundation, one of the world's largest philanthropic organizations. He was notoriously private, rarely photographed, and his presence here was a major event. He seemed unfazed by the chaos, his expression impassive, as his security team tried to clear a path. His gaze swept the crowd, and for a heart-stopping moment, his eyes met Emma's. There was a flicker of recognition, a ghost of the smile she'd seen on the terrace. Chloe was gaping. "Oh my God, you were talking to Alistair Sterling, the great white whale of the Forbes list." Before Emma could answer, the crowd surged. A clumsy photographer stumbled backward, bumping into Emma and sending her off balance. She gasped, expecting to fall, but a strong hand shot out and caught her arm, steadying her. Another hand instinctively found hers, lacing their fingers together in a firm, protective grip. It was Alistair. He had broken from his security cordon and was suddenly right there, his body shielding hers from the jostling crowd. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low and concerned, meant only for her. She could only nod, speechless. The world seemed to slow down. The roar of the paparazzi, the shouting, it all faded into a dull hum. All she could feel was the warmth of his hand, the solid presence of him next to her. It lasted only for a few seconds. His security team quickly enveloped them, guiding them towards a waiting black sedan, a car far more imposing than the Uber they had called. He opened the back door, still holding her hand, and looked at her. "Let me give you a ride," he said. It wasn't a request. Dumbly, she nodded again and slid into the plush leather interior. Chloe scrambled in after her, wide-eyed. Alistair followed, and the door shut with a heavy, satisfying thud, sealing them in a cocoon of silence. The car pulled away from the curb, leaving the flashing lights behind. Emma looked down. Her hand was still linked with his. Across the street, hidden in the shadows, a freelance paparazzo, who had missed the main scrum, lowered his camera. He hadn't gotten a clear shot of Sterling's face, but he'd gotten something else, something intimate and intriguing. A close-up of their hands perfectly intertwined, a story in a single frame. He smiled. This was better than a politician. This was gold. Emma woke up to the sound of a hurricane. Not a literal one, but the digital tempest of her phone vibrating violently on her bedside table. It buzzed and chirped with a relentless, frantic energy she'd never experienced before. Groggily, she reached for it, her mind still fuzzy from the surreal events of the previous night. Alistair's driver had dropped her and Chloe off, a polite and formal goodbye hanging in the air. The feeling of his hand in hers lingered like a phantom limb. She squinted at the screen. 347 new text messages, 98 missed calls, a torrent of notifications from Instagram, Twitter, and news apps she didn't even remember installing. Her blood ran cold. This was the kind of attention Julian received, not her. Her thumb trembled as she swiped to open a text from Chloe. It was a string of incoherent capital letters and a link. Chloe, Emma. Oh my God, holy Sikh, look at this now. With a deep sense of foreboding, she clicked the link. It took her to the homepage of TMZ. And there it was. The lead story. The photograph. It was an artful shot, tightly framed and undeniable. Two hands. Her hand, recognizable by the delicate silver ring her grandmother had left her, was entwined with a man's larger, stronger hand. The cuff of a tuxedo and a sliver of an impossibly expensive-looking watch were visible. The headline screamed, "Mystery Woman, Reclusive Billionaire, Alistair Sterling, in Shockingly Public Romance." She dropped the phone as if it had burned her. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She scrambled to open other news sites. Page 6. The Daily Mail, Vanity Fair. It was everywhere. The same photo. The same breathless speculation. Who is Alistair Sterling's secret girlfriend, the handhold seen round the world? Sources say the woman is a stunning brunette who spent the evening at the St. Jude's Gala with the tech mogul. She was the mystery woman, the stunning brunette. It felt like she was reading about a character in a novel, not herself. Then her stomach dropped as she saw the comments section. The digital mob was already at work. Sleuths were trying to identify her. And then someone did. A gossip columnist with a long memory posted a picture of her from 3 years ago standing behind Julian at a book launch. The narrative shifted with whiplash speed. Update: Sterling's mystery woman, identified as Emma Vance, ex-wife of self-help guru Julian Thorne. And that's when the second storm hit. Julian's storm. He hadn't waited. He hadn't stayed silent. He had gone on the offensive with brutal surgical precision. He posted a statement on his Instagram, a platform with 20 million followers. It was a masterclass in manipulation, cloaked in his signature brand of faux vulnerability. The post was a picture of him looking pensively out a window, a cup of tea in his hands. The caption began, "Friends, many of you have been asking me about the recent news. It is with a heavy heart that I must address this. As you know, I have recently gone through a painful and private separation. I have tried to handle this with dignity and grace, wishing only the best for Emma. To see these photos today is deeply concerning." Emma felt sick. Concerned, I have always been a supporter of Emma, even as we grew apart. But I fear she is in a vulnerable place right now. To see her latch onto a man of such immense wealth and power so quickly, literally the day after our divorce was finalized, is alarming. I pray that she is not being taken advantage of, and that this is not a cry for help or a desperate attempt to fill a void. I am worried for her well-being. I will be making no further comment on this matter, as I wish to focus on healing. Please send her your positive energy. It was diabolical. In one fell swoop, he had painted her as a mentally unstable, desperate gold digger. He was the concerned, sensitive ex-husband. She was the pathetic, grasping woman. He had co-opted the language of therapy and wellness, a language she had helped him perfect, and turned it into a weapon against her. The comments were a tidal wave of vitriol aimed squarely at her. Wow, she didn't waste any time, did she, gold digger alert? Poor Julian, he's so classy, she's clearly a mess. I knew there was a reason he left her. She sounds like a parasite. Hope Alistair Sterling sees her for what she is. She's just using him for his money. The curse. You're nothing without me. No one will ever want you. He was making it come true, not by magic, but by the brute force of public opinion. He was branding her, defining her for the entire world, before she could even speak a word in her own defense. Her tiny apartment felt like it was closing in on her. The brick wall outside was a prison. She curled into a ball on her bed, the phone lying face down on the floor, still buzzing, still spewing poison. The shame was suffocating. He had won. He had utterly, completely destroyed her. She had defied his curse for one night, and in return, he had unleashed hell. The tears she had held back for so long finally came not as a gentle rain, but as a racking, hopeless storm. The knocking was soft at first, then more insistent. Emma ignored it, pulling a pillow over her head to block out the world. It was probably a reporter or a process server with a cease and desist letter from Julian's lawyers for besmirching his good name. Emma, it's Chloe. Open this door right now, or I'm calling the fire department and telling them I smell gas and a crazy woman with a vintage toaster. Reluctantly, Emma dragged herself to the door and unbolted it. Chloe swept in her face a mixture of fury and concern. She was holding a large bag from a fancy bakery and the morning papers, which she promptly threw in the trash. Don't read that garbage, she ordered. I've already seen it. That man is not a human being. He's a sentient, weaponized press release. Chloe took in Emma's tear-streaked face and crumpled form, and her expression softened. Oh, honey. She enveloped Emma in a hug. Don't you let him do this to you. Don't you let him win. He already has Chloe, Emma croaked. Look at what they're saying. The whole world thinks I'm some desperate, grasping social climber. He knew exactly what he was doing. Of course he did. Chloe said, her voice steely. This is his playbook. Control the narrative. Isolate the target. Publicly humiliate. He did it to that journalist who wrote a critical profile of him 2 years ago. Remember? He's a predator. Just then, Emma's intercom buzzed, making them both jump. Emma stared at it in terror. Don't answer it, she whispered. It could be the pizza I ordered for moral support, Chloe said, trying to lighten the mood. She pressed the button. Who is it? A calm, male voice, devoid of static, came through the speaker. It's Alistair Sterling. For Emma Vance. Emma and Chloe froze, staring at each other in disbelief. Alistair Sterling. Here, at her third-floor walk-up in Brooklyn. Let him in, Chloe hissed, suddenly galvanized. For God's sake, Emma, buzz him in. In a daze, Emma pressed the button. A few moments later, there was a quiet knock on her apartment door. She opened it to find him standing there. He was dressed not in a tuxedo, but in dark jeans, a simple grey t-shirt, and a lightweight jacket. He looked younger, less intimidating, but the same quiet intensity radiated from him. He was holding a small, unassuming cardboard box. "Miss Vance." "Emma," he said, his grey eyes searching her face. He saw the tear tracks, the fear. His expression wasn't one of pity, but of a kind of grim understanding. "I know this is an intrusion. May I come in?" She could only nod, stepping aside. He walked into her tiny living room, his presence making the space feel both smaller and safer at the same time. He glanced around at the bookshelves, his eyes lingering on the titles. "I came to apologize," he said, turning back to her. "My presence last night and my carelessness brought this circus upon you. I am truly sorry for that." "It's not your fault," Emma said, finding her voice. "It's his. It's my world that has invaded yours." Alistair countered, "And I have some experience with this, which is why I'm here." He placed the box he was carrying on her coffee table. "This is for you." She opened it cautiously. Inside was a sleek silver device. "It's a secure, encrypted satellite phone," he explained. "Untraceable, unhackable. My personal number is the only one programmed into it. Your current phone is a liability. The press can track it. It can be hacked. This is safe." Emma stared at him, bewildered by the practicality and foresight of the gesture. "I also saw his statement." Alistair continued, his voice hardening almost imperceptibly. "It was a cowardly and calculated attack. He is attempting to define you before you have a chance to define yourself. I will not allow that to happen." Chloe, who had been watching from the kitchen doorway like it was a tennis match, finally spoke up. "Damn right. But how do we fight back? He has 20 million followers who think he's the second coming." Alistair met Chloe's gaze, giving her a nod of respect. "You don't fight him on his battlefield. You don't sling mud. You render his attacks irrelevant by telling the truth, but on your own terms." He looked back at Emma, his focus entirely on her. "He's accused you of being a gold digger. So we show them you have no interest in my money. He's painted you as unstable. So we show them your strength and intelligence." A spark of anger, hot and clean, finally burned through Emma's despair. "He built his entire empire on my work." The words hung in the air. Alistair's expression sharpened. "What do you mean, his book?" Emma said, the story pouring out of her now. "The Architect of You. It was supposed to be my book. My dissertation was on the philosophical concept of the self in Renaissance art, how artists and thinkers of the time constructed their public and private personas. It was about authenticity, legacy, building a life of substance. I had a manuscript, years of research. Julian, he took it. He read it, simplified it, stripped out all the academic nuance, and repackaged it with pop psychology buzzwords. He stole my soul and sold it as a self-help guide." Chloe looked horrified. "Emma, you never told me it was that direct." "I was ashamed," Emma admitted. "And he convinced me that no one would ever believe me, that it was our project." Alistair was silent for a long moment, his jaw tight. He looked from the pain in Emma's face to the bookshelves crammed with her life's passion. "Do you have proof?" he asked quietly. "Drafts, notes, emails." Emma's heart leaped. "Yes, they're in storage, old laptops, boxes of notes. I have everything." Alistair's expression was now one of cold, clear purpose. He was no longer just a handsome stranger or a reclusive billionaire. He was an ally, a powerful one. "Then we have a new plan," he said. "We are no longer on the defensive." He wrote that he's concerned about you. Let's give him something to be genuinely concerned about. He looked directly at Emma, and for the first time, she saw not just kindness, but a deep, formidable strength that he was offering to share. He tried to take your voice, Emma. I think it's time the world finally heard it. The next week was a whirlwind of covert operations and quiet strategy orchestrated from Alistair Sterling's minimalist Soho office, a place that felt more like a modern art gallery than a corporate headquarters. There were no reporters outside, no paparazzi. Alistair's world was protected by a level of security and discretion that was an art form in itself. His team, a small group of fiercely loyal and terrifyingly competent individuals, retrieved Emma's boxes from storage. They worked with a forensic IT specialist who recovered every draft, every time-stamped note, every email exchange from her old hard drives. They laid it all out on a large conference table, a mountain of evidence that traced the intellectual genesis of the architect of you directly and unequivocally to Emma. There were her early manuscripts full of complex academic arguments next to Julian's later dumbed-down versions with his handwritten notes in the margins changing her phrasing into marketable sound bites. It was a clear and damning paper trail of intellectual theft. Seeing it all laid out, Emma felt a profound sense of validation, followed by a surge of cold fury. "He didn't just steal my words," she said to Alistair, her voice shaking with emotion. "He stole my entire thesis on life. And then he used it to lecture the world and me about authenticity." Alistair stood beside her, his presence a steady anchor. Over the past few days, their alliance had deepened into something more. They'd spent hours talking not just about Julian, but about everything. She learned about his own past with the media, a vicious, untrue story about his family that had made him retreat from public life years ago. He learned about her passion for Artemisia Gentileschi, and he listened, truly listened, with an intensity that made her feel seen and heard in a way she never had with Julian. A quiet, powerful intimacy was growing between them, forged in the crucible of their shared crisis. "He won't get away with it," Alistair said, his voice low and resolute. "Now, we need to choose our moment." The moment presented itself a few days later. An invitation arrived for Julian to be the keynote speaker at the Global Integrity Summit, a Davos-like conference for tech leaders and media personalities. His topic, dripping with irony, was truth and transparency in the digital age. "It's perfect," Chloe said, her eyes gleaming. "It's his home turf. He'll feel untouchable. The hubris will be off the charts. He'll have the whole event locked down," Emma countered, a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. "I can't just walk in and accuse him." "You won't have to," Alistair said. He tapped a few commands into his tablet. A picture of a woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense haircut appeared on the screen. "This is Sarah Jenkins. She's moderating his keynote. She's one of the toughest investigative journalists in the business. She owes my foundation a favor for funding her documentary on dark money in politics. More importantly, she hates frauds." The plan was audacious. Sarah Jenkins, armed with a dossier of Emma's evidence, would conduct the Q&A after Julian's speech. She wouldn't ambush him with accusations. She would do it with his own words and with Emma's. The day of the summit, Emma felt sick with nerves. She wasn't at the conference hall. She was with Alistair and Chloe in a secure viewing suite nearby, watching the live feed on a massive screen. She had done her part. She had written a formal, eloquent statement and had given Sarah Jenkins her blessing to use her research, her words, her story. The broadcast began. There was Julian on a massive stage, bathed in a reverent blue light. He was at the peak of his powers, delivering a smooth, charismatic speech about the importance of living an authentic life. He even had the gall to reference his divorce. Recently, he said, his voice thick with false emotion, "I had to make a difficult choice to align my private life with my public values of honesty and growth. It was painful, but living your truth is never easy." Emma felt Alistair's hand find hers under the table. She gripped it tightly. Julian finished his speech to thunderous applause. He sat down beaming as Sarah Jenkins took the seat opposite him. She started with a few softball questions, lulling him into a state of comfortable arrogance. Then she shifted. "Julian, your book, The Architect of You, is built on a very powerful central metaphor of constructing a life. It's incredibly detailed. I was curious about your research process." Julian preened. "It was years of work, deep personal intellectual exploration. It really came from my soul." "Interesting," Sarah said, looking down at her notes. "Because I have here some academic papers from 2012, written by a then Emma Vance, that explore the exact same theme, the construction of persona in the Renaissance. The language is remarkably similar. For instance, you write, 'To be authentic is to be the sole architect of your own reality.' A fascinating turn of phrase. Almost identical to Ms. Vance's 2011 dissertation proposal, which states, 'The Renaissance ideal was to be the sole architect of one's public reality.'" A flicker of panic in Julian's eyes. The audience murmured. Sarah pressed on her voice like ice. "In Chapter 3, you discuss the facade of legacy, Ms. Vance's research uses the exact same term, the facade of legacy, in relation to the Medici family. On page 184, you use an anecdote about Michelangelo. That anecdote is lifted almost verbatim from an email Ms. Vance sent you in 2013, which we have a copy of. Shall I go on?" The color drained from Julian's face. He was sputtering, trying to interrupt. This is an ambush. My work with my ex-wife was a collaboration. She was my partner. Was she a collaborator when you registered the copyright solely in your name?" Sarah countered, her voice sharp. "Was she a collaborator when you pocketed the entirety of the 8-figure advance? We spoke to your publisher. Her name is not mentioned on any contract. In fact, we have a statement from Ms. Vance herself." And then on the giant screen behind the stage, a picture of Emma appeared. Not a paparazzi shot, but a professional, dignified headshot they had taken days before. Beside it, her statement began to scroll. "I am not a victim or a gold digger," the statement read. "I am a scholar. The core concepts, the research, and the intellectual framework of The Architect of You were my work. I am proud of that work, and I will not allow it to be used to promote a false narrative of authenticity, nor to be used as a weapon to publicly shame me. The truth, as Mr. Thorne is so fond of saying, has a way of coming out." The room was in stunned silence. Julian Thorne, the great guru of truth, was staring at the screen, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. His carefully constructed world was crumbling around him, live in front of his most important peers. He was being exposed not just as a liar, but as a thief. The cameras zoomed in on his face, no longer smug, but pale and sweating. The architect had been unmasked, revealing nothing but a hollow frame behind the beautiful facade. The reckoning had arrived. The silence in the conference hall was a living entity. It was thick, heavy, and absolute. On the massive screen, Julian Thorne's face, once a carefully curated mask of enlightened confidence, was now a canvas of pure, unfiltered horror. The camera operator, sensing a historic moment, held the close-up, refusing to cut away. The world watched as the architect of You was publicly deconstructed beam by rotten beam. He didn't just look guilty, he looked erased. In the quiet viewing suite, the only sound was the sharp intake of Chloe's breath. Emma sat perfectly still, her hand held firmly in Alistair's. She wasn't watching Julian's face. She was watching the words on the screen. Her words, her truth, finally illuminated for all to see. It wasn't a feeling of triumph that washed over her, but one of profound, solemn relief, like a patient taking their first breath after a long and suffocating fever. The noise in her head, the constant echo of Julian's gaslighting, and her own self-doubt had finally ceased. Alistair squeezed her hand gently. "How do you feel?" he asked, his voice low. Quiet, she whispered, a small, wondering smile touching her lips. "The storm. I think it's finally over." He brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a gesture of profound respect. "No," he said, his grey eyes soft but resolute. "The storm is just beginning for him. For you, this is the dawn." The fallout was a digital tsunami. Before Julian could even be escorted off the stage by stunned event staff, the clip was being sliced, diced, and shared across every platform. Thorn fraud. The Great Pretender and his stand with Emma Vance exploded globally. The initial trickle of outrage became a flood. Celebrities who had once touted his book as their Bible posted hurried statements of condemnation. Brands that had sponsored his podcast issued press releases severing all ties. His publisher, facing a public relations nightmare, released a statement within 3 hours. "In light of new information regarding the authorship of The Architect of You, we are immediately suspending all promotion and distribution of the title and will be conducting a full review of our relationship with Mr. Thorne." It was corporate speak for a public execution. Crystal, his model girlfriend, quietly deleted every photo of him from her Instagram feed. His powerful friends stopped returning his calls. The machine that had protected and promoted him turned on him with merciless efficiency. The final humiliating image came a week later, a grainy paparazzi photo of Julian unshaven and haggard in a wrinkled tracksuit, frantically putting trash bins out in front of his empty penthouse. The man who had preached about designing one's life looked like he had lost the blueprint to his own. Emma, however, refused to get drawn into the spectacle of his demise. While the world feasted on the schadenfreude she and Alistair were building, her new legal team, a phalanx of New York's sharpest minds funded by Alistair, moved with swift precision. The settlement meeting wasn't a negotiation. It was a dictation of terms. Emma sat at the head of the table, calm and composed, as her lawyers laid out the undeniable evidence of intellectual property theft and demanded reparations, not alimony, but a figure representing her share of the book's profits and damages for copyright infringement. Julian's legal team, knowing they were beaten, folded without a fight. With the first transfer of funds, she didn't buy a new apartment or a new wardrobe. Her first act was to sign the charter for the Vance Institute for Historical Studies. Its mission was clear: to fund and promote the work of scholars, particularly women, in fields historically dominated by men. Its first grant was awarded to a young art historian who had discovered compelling evidence that a famous sculpture attributed to a 17th-century master was in fact the work of his uncredited and forgotten sister. Her next meeting was with the acquisitions editor of a prestigious university press. The editor, a woman with kind eyes and a deep respect for academia, didn't just want to publish her original manuscript on Gentileschi. She wanted to publish a new expanded edition. "We also want you to write a new introduction," the editor said, "about your journey, about what it means to reclaim a narrative, your story. It's as important as the history you write about." For the first time, Emma cried. Not tears of sorrow or anger, but of overwhelming gratitude. Throughout it all, Alistair was her silent, steadfast partner. He never overshadowed her, never spoke for her. He simply created a space where she could be heard. Their relationship, born in the glare of a media firestorm, settled into a rhythm that was quiet, private, and deeply authentic. One evening, he came to her small Brooklyn apartment, the apartment she had decided to keep a reminder of, where she had started her new life. He found her covered in flour, attempting to bake bread, her tiny kitchen a chaotic mess. He didn't laugh at the mess. He simply rolled up the sleeves of his expensive shirt, washed his hands, and started helping her knead the dough. "You know," he said, his hands working alongside hers, "my life was very orderly before I met you. Every minute scheduled, every interaction vetted. I'm sorry for disrupting it," she said with a small smile. "Don't be," he replied, stopping to look at her, his eyes serious. "It was orderly, but it was grey. You brought the color back, Emma. You make the noise of the world bearable." A few months later, they stood on the terrace of his penthouse. It was a crisp autumn evening, and the city lights spread out below them like a carpet of fallen stars. The space, unlike Julian's cold, minimalist trophy home, was warm and lived in, filled with books stacked on every surface and art that was challenging and personal. He handed her an advance copy of her book, The Power of Persona Artemisia Gentileschi and the Forging of a Legacy, by Dr. Emma Vance. Her name, her title, her work. She ran her fingers over the embossed letters. "I used to stand in a place just like this and feel like the smallest person in the world," she confessed, her voice soft. "He told me that I was nothing without him, that I would die alone." Alistair wrapped his arms around her from behind, pulling her close. "He was a fool," he murmured into her hair. "A man that insecure could never understand a woman like you. He didn't understand the irony of his own curse." Emma leaned back against his chest, finally understanding. "He thought it was an ending," she said, a sense of wonder in her voice. "But it was a catalyst. If he hadn't said those things, if he hadn't pushed me out so cruelly, I would never have gone to that gala. I would never have met you. I would never have found the courage to fight for my work." Julian's curse wasn't a prophecy. It was an accidental gift. His attempt to consign her to oblivion was the very thing that had forced her into the light. He had meant to be the architect of her destruction, but instead, he had merely laid the foundation for her magnificent reconstruction. She turned in Alistair's arms, looking up at him. The love she saw in his eyes was not the possessive, conditional affection she had once known, but a deep, quiet partnership built on mutual respect and a shared truth. The city lights below no longer seemed to mock her, but to celebrate with her. It was a new dawn, bright and clear, and infinite with promise. And it was all hers. Emma Vance's story is a powerful reminder that our worth is never determined by someone else's opinion, especially the opinion of those who try to diminish us. It's a testament to the fact that the end of one chapter, no matter how painful, is often the necessary prelude to a far better one. Her journey from a cursed ex-wife to a celebrated scholar, hand in hand, with a man who saw her for who she truly was, shows us that the most profound comebacks are rooted in reclaiming our own truth and our own voice. Julian's curse was meant to be her prison, but it became the key that unlocked her true potential.